Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. From the cockpit, Captain Brown speaking. Welcome aboard for our flight today to Los Angeles. We're at a cruising altitude of 33,000 feet. I'm getting reports of smooth rides. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the seatbelt sign. While the seatbelt sign's off, feel free to move about the cabin, use the lavatories. However, I do ask to stay in your seats with your seatbelts fastened in case we run into some unexpected bumpy air. Flying time today, 5 hours, 30 minutes. We should get to Los Angeles about 10 o'clock local time, where the weather is 72 degrees, clear skies, as usual out there in California. We've got a great crew to take good care of you back there. We're going to do all we can to give you a safe, smooth, comfortable ride. So all we ask now is that you relax and enjoy the ride.
Good morning and welcome back, everyone, to Audio Pong. With me, as always, is Zach. Good morning, Zach.
Good morning, Marco.
And today we have they're all special guests, but he's an extra special guest. This is Pilot Pete, and Pete is are you a former? Is it fair to say you're former or current airline pilot?
Retired airline pilot would be the best way.
Retired airline pilot.
Close.
And how long? Let's just start with that. Let's talk about your career, I guess, right off the bat. How long have you been a pilot? I
started flying for the Navy back in 1979. So was that 43 years now? Is that right? Got the math right?
So you started in the Navy. Wow, I don't even know. So you were a Navy fighter pilot?
I was a Navy P-3 pilot. We were the submarine hunters, is the best way to put it. It was a 4-engine turboprop.
Oh, wow.
So, as I like to say to people, I went to Penn State on a full scholarship, and they say, "Did you play football?" I said, "I was left out." because it was a 4-year Navy scholarship, Navy ROTC. So I graduated, went down to flight school, got my wings in 1980, and flew P-3s for a few years, and then became a flight instructor down in Pensacola, Florida for the last couple of years. So I got out at the end of 1986 and went to work for American Airlines in 1987. And a couple of years ago with the pandemic, they had a early out program to deal with the reduction in flights to try to cut their costs. So I took part in that. So retirement is that mandatory retirement for an airline pilot is at 65. So I'll be 65 in January, so that's when I'll be officially retired. But I haven't flown in the last couple of years because of my leave of absence status. So,
how old were you when you got your wings in 1980?
I was.
Not to date you,
let me do the math. I was 22 years old.
Wow!
And did you start? Cool. Did you start ROTC in like high school or? Nope.
It was just when I was at Penn State. When I was a little kid, I grew up in a tenement building in the Bronx. Came from a family of 7 kids and my mom and dad. And I remember my mother watching the ticker tape parade for John Glenn. And she was so excited about it, what a hero he was. And she explained that he was an astronaut. And so between that and my dad taking me to the Hayden Planetarium and going to seeing the rockets, and everything space in the 60s was the space age. I wanted to become an astronaut. So my dad told me, well, if you want to be an astronaut, I think it's the military pilots that they want to take for that, so you need to be, in the military and be a military pilot. So just started pursuing that as a young kid. I guess I'm one of the few people who was really focused on what I wanted to do and then went on and did that. So, I did a lot of research on it. I wanted to go to the service academies, either Air Force or Naval Academy, because they had pilots in both of those branches. And my father said, well, you should look into this ROTC program as a backup, which I did. And I'm glad because I didn't get into the Naval Academy. I was like the 212th alternate. So I ended up going to Penn State. With ROTC, you apply for the scholarship, and then you apply for the colleges that have the programs to try to get accepted. So I told my father, well, I've narrowed down my choices for college. And he said, well, what are they? And I said, well, University of Hawaii, University of Southern California, and University of Miami. Why not, And he started
Yeah.
laughing and said, well, how do you think you're going to get back home for Thanksgiving and Christmas and all that? Back then it was very expensive to fly, before deregulation. So then it became, what colleges are within a, so many hour driving radius. So Penn State was within 5 hours, and I got accepted by them. So I ended up going to Penn State because I wanted to be far enough away that I wasn't coming home every weekend, but not too far away that I could make it home for the holidays on a bus or a car share ride or something like that. So that's how that all happened.
Now, and then was that throughout your entire career? So right off the bat, you had a kind of like a choice, basically, almost like some trucking outfits where you have like a work-life balance, or was it always that nice? Like being a pilot, was a work-life balance good, or are there definitely like stretches or moments or periods where, one took over the other?
In the Navy, we would go on deployments when I was flying the P3s. So we'd go overseas, either Bermuda, if you could believe that or not. That was an overseas posting, or Sicily, Spain, the Azores, and we'd be away for like, I don't know, 5 months, and you get home a couple of times during that period, to see your loved ones. So the separation was difficult at that time, and then going down as a flight instructor, it was a little bit better. That was considered shore duty, so you're home every night, so that was a little bit better. And my intention was to be a career naval officer. I would have liked to have made admiral. Probably, maybe captain would have been more obtainable. But my next door neighbor down in Pensacola was one of my old P3 squadron mates. And I went over to his house one morning, and he was at his kitchen table. I said, with the typewriter, I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm typing up my resumes for the airlines." So, well, why would you want to fly for the airlines? That's so boring. And so he said, "Pull up a chair." And he gave me a briefing on what it was like in the airlines, and what the duty rigs were like, what it was going to be like being in the Navy for the next 10 years or so, trying to make a career out of it. And that discussion lasted about 30 minutes. I left his house, went over to my house, and typed up my resignation letter for the Navy. And I said, "I'm going to go for the airlines. It sounds like a pretty good deal." I mean, I just had no idea about the airlines. I just thought, it was boring flying. But the longer I stayed in the Navy, the less flying I was going to do. So got hired by American. And even though you were gone on trips a couple of times a week, for maybe gone for 2 nights or whatever, you were still home. And, so it was nice when we started having kids that I was around on my days off to be a hands-on dad. But as my wife and I, like to tell people, this past 2 years has been the first time that we have actually been together, for so long, actually sleeping together for a whole year without me going off on a trip or being deployed somewhere or something like that. So,
Your whole life. So this is the first time your whole life that it's been that way.
right, because you've always been going away either for a long deployment or just for your overnight trips that you'd be flying. So, it's nice. It's nice. As I tell everybody when they say, "Do you miss the flying?" I had a great career. I loved my time in the Navy. I loved my time in American, but there's nothing like having a regular schedule, a regular sleep cycle, regular exercise, everything. Because with flying, it gets disrupted depending on when you have to go to work, where you're laying over, how much time you have, where you're going to go to eat, if something's even home when you get in late. So this normalcy, which I think most people already have, is like kind of a nice thing, and.
How do you stay in shape when you're a pilot? Like for like physical health? Like how do you take care of yourself when you're always away?
Okay, you drink a lot of water in the cockpit because it's a dry environment because of the pressurization, not a lot of moisture in the air. So I think hydration is important. The food they serve you, some guys say there's a lot of preservatives in it and all that, but I never met an airline meal that I didn't like. It was usually pretty good. But I would also bring food to eat or protein powder shakes after I work out. And on layovers, they always had a gym at the hotel, or there were usually places to go running outside, running past and all that. So this was something else I was thinking about what I was going to say here. Well, my father died when I was 17. But a couple of years before that, he had just the barbell, nothing else. So he was trying to exercise, doing some presses and curls and all that. And he said to me, never let yourself get out of shape, because it's so hard to get back into shape. And this is a guy in his 50s, and he had gone to the
Yeah,
Merchant
that's really good
Academy, very
advice.
fit. So it was good advice, just kind of stuck with me. So I always made it a point to work out. And somebody says, "Oh, well, it must be easy for
Yeah.
airline pilots." But if that's true, then I guess all airline pilots would be fit. But that isn't necessarily the case either. So it's just a priority. But I certainly had the ability to do that on my layovers and make healthy choices eating. So
So your father passed right before you went to the military and into the college and
right before
everything.
I went to college, and
My
that was
goodness.
another. It was like I was. My father was very controlling, because he had problems with the older children. Let's say, I'll leave it at that. But um,
Mm.
not to put a bummer on the conversation. Go back to when I was 12. My brother and I, who had just come home from Vietnam, he'd been home for about 6 months. He and I went on this awesome canoe trip up in the Adirondacks region of New York State. And when we got back, um, a couple of months later, he was killed in a car crash. So here he was, he had survived Vietnam, came home, died in a car crash. So that, obviously does a number on parents and siblings as well. So my father, I think, wanted to be as close to me as he could, because I was the only son left at that
Yeah.
point. I had 5 sisters. So,
Wow.
so I don't know. I guess I don't know where I'm going with this, but anyway, my father had a lot. Just was my guide. He was my discipline. I wasn't allowed to do a lot of things with my friends, like go to concerts, or always this guilty thing. Well, you should be home helping out, help me work on the car. So I'd always end up holding the flashlight and all that. Well, anyway, when
Mm.
he died in August, before I went off to Penn State, I got to Penn State, and it's like, well, now what? And it's a party environment, so I did get into a little bit of the partying and the drinking, and I was going to be an engineer, and I ended up having to change majors because I was partying a little too much. So I was able to maintain my scholarship and graduate on time. But I think losing that discipline and having that happen at that point, in retrospect, was pretty traumatic. And I just wonder what kids today, might be experiencing if they go through something like that. The resources that might be available, or just how difficult it is. I left my mother at home with my sisters. A little bit of the guilt of, like, I should be staying home and providing for the
Right.
family. But fortunately, my dad worked for IBM, and they took very good care of their employees and their survivors. Back in the day when they were Big Blue, and companies, were a little more concerned about their workers than their shareholders.
Corporations cared, yeah, a little bit more about the people that worked for them.
Yeah.
No, I think that's really impressive. You touched on that a bit, and I know people in my life that have similar stories, and I'm impressed because I'm impressed with their, let's say, their success and their survival through that trauma or tribulation, because I also know people who suffered less, let's say, tribulation by comparison, and their lives are messed up. They gave up on themselves right away. So that is, no, that's profound. I think that's extremely profound when someone can survive that kind of a blow, especially since you must have felt, you maybe you can talk a little more about it if you feel like it, but it must have felt like in a way the reins were gone. Not to say that you were upset your father was dead. Of course, I mean that obviously you mourned him, but there must have been a little bit of the reins being gone, and something of your spirit wanting to just let loose, especially to handle the grief. Does that make sense? I know
Yes.
I've been that way sometimes in my life.
I think that was it exactly, because I told the line with my father, and just our upbringing, to do what's right, work hard in school, and yeah, it was like my control was gone. And I think if my father hadn't died, I probably would have made it through the engineering curriculum, and would have been a different route. I would have still been a pilot. But yeah, just obviously I was depressed and treated myself with alcohol, I think is what it was, and no real
Yeah.
role model or mentor at that time, or anybody to check in. And at the same time, my mother was starting to show signs of Alzheimer's with forgetfulness. So,
Oh
and
wow.
she was pretty, I guess, soft. She was like a loving mom. She couldn't hurt a fly, and so she wasn't much of a disciplinarian either. So didn't have that after my father died. So yeah, and in that respect too, to switch gears, my dad died when I was 17, and here I am, a father. Cam, and I got Jake, and I would have to ask other guys. I said, "So what was it like with your dad after this point and all that?" And a lot of people, when I brought up this discussion, were like, "Holy cow! So you don't know what it's like to have a dad after 17?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "What am I supposed to be doing with my kids? I'm doing what I think is right, but do you have any advice and all that?" And you kind of, treat your kids the way your parents did, and then take the good and try to leave out the bad and do
Right.
something different. And I think it worked out good with Cam and Jake. I was just there a lot as an airline pilot, and just trying to teach them to be good people, and just try to be there, tell them that they were loved and all of that. And I'm sure that's why, back then people didn't, dads didn't say they love you, but I did that a lot with the kids.
When did that change? When did you start saying "I love you" to your sons?
I, it's interesting. I think when they got older, because I had these milestones. So one was getting them past the age of 17, because that's when my father died. And then
Right.
getting them past the age of 23, because that's when my brother died. And then me getting past the age of 56, because that's when my father died. So here I am, going to be 65 in January. So, I, breathe a sigh of relief for all those milestones. I was just telling somebody this story the other day. When hiking with the boys, and I always thought it'd be important to, like, just tell them, I love you, care for you. If you ever need anything, you always know to come to me. So we got up to the top of the mountain, and I said, "You know what, guys?" And then Cam says to Jake, "Okay, Jake, here it comes. This is where Dad says how much he loves us." It's just, I got
Leave
upset.
it to Camden to
I
ruin
said,
a tender
"Okay,
moment.
forget it. I hate you. You like that better for me to say that?" But no, you can't. And I was thinking about that too. It says, "Oh, love is the answer. Love is the answer." Like is the answer, or at least respecting other people. I think love, for a guy to say, "Oh, I love you" and all that, if it isn't his, significant other, I think it's tough to say. I love, but I mean, like is good enough if you
I
like
agree.
somebody. And if you don't like them, then at least, maybe respect them, and, find somebody else to hang out with. I'm rambling.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you said it. I think like is a stronger word. I mean, I feel that way. I've always felt that way. Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
A little easier.
Well, I think like is a more applicable word. I think it's easier to apply like when I use the word love, I mean it. Like that's like if I say I love you, that's like that's it. I will die for you. It's like that's someone I see as a brother or a sister, or someone that's like family at that point.
So
But yeah.
do you guys, I'm assuming your dads are still around, and do you have a good relationship with them?
My father passed when I was 12.
Oh, Jesus, you
So
got it. That's terrible.
yeah, and my sister was 2 and my brother was 10. So yeah, and I grew up pretty fast because of that.
I bet.
Uh, you know, People telling me you're the man of the house now, so you gotta take care of everyone. You gotta make sure everyone's okay. Like okay, and I took that to heart, and I really like stepped up. Um, didn't really. I don't know. I was around friends a lot in high school. But I didn't do much. I didn't party or anything like that. So,
Was your
but
mother
it's all
was
right.
your mother there? Like, was she okay? And was she dealing with it?
That For a while she was very grief stricken. I mean, we all were. So I was I was picking up a lot, which is fine. I don't regret any of that, and I don't blame my mom for anything. She's actually a very wonderful mother, very loving parent, and she's the nicest human being I've ever known. And that's sorry, excuse me. Um, she's the most wonderful person that I've ever met, and that's like I say my father taught me how to be a good man, and my mother taught me how to be a good person. Because my father, like he instilled a lot of like I don't know, manly traits, providing for the family, things like that, survival skills, things like how to camp, how to make a fire, how to wield a knife, how to do all that stuff. My mother taught me how to be a caring individual and how to use compassion and stuff like that. So, but yeah, how about you, Marco?
Good life lessons. My father's actually still alive, but I'm not going to make the comparison because it doesn't compare to losing a father, but you could say that he wasn't a father after a certain point. Like when I hit my late teens, my life was very turned upside down. Um, and not to get into like a long story, but he just wasn't there. He still isn't. You know what I mean? So I got some of that around the same age as you, and then it stopped. um, but that's whatever. I was lucky again with my mother because my mother is basically two parents in one because she was able to be strong and disciplined and be loving and caring. And you never knew which one you're going to get. So it kept you on your toes.
Your mother's a beast, though.
Yeah.
She is. How old is she now?
She just turned 65 in September.
And she is so active and in shape, and it's crazy. She's kind of like you, how you're very in shape too.
I was gonna say,
it's like it's insane. Like she could ride do a 60-mile bike ride if she really decided to, just like how you did. And here I am on my couch, like thinking like, there's no way my back could handle that. Yeah. I couldn't be in that position that long. Like my God.
No, I'm lucky when it comes to that because her and my grandmother, they're the kind of people even if they can't do it, they'll push themselves thinking they can.
Yeah, and your mom's a very nice person as well. She's a very caring person. She's great.
Well, somebody in college had told me, I was talking to him about losing my dad, and he had lost his father too. And I said, well, how do you deal with that? He says, well, there's plenty of people out there that have it worse than me. And I just think about that. And like you saying that your dad died at 12, of course that's worse. And like having a dad.
Well, I think at any age, I mean, I think you at 17, that's another very formal years where it's like you're moving to college. The amount of stress of that, and then you also going into the military. My mom, when I went to college, she had a gastric bypass and her lower intestine burst in 2 spots. So she was going through the throes of death. Like if she didn't get to the hospital within 2 hours, she could have passed away. Like it was very close. And just that, her recovering from that was stressful enough for me. I couldn't eat or anything. The freshman 15, they say you gain 15 pounds. I lost like 30. It was ridiculous. You could see my rib cage like coming out through my like the top of my chest and everything. It was horrible. But just to imagine at 17 and your mom's going through Alzheimer's like signs, and your father just passed, like that too is just as bad as any of the things. I don't think that pain is I think it's relative, though your worst thing is still your worst thing. I don't know. That's just kind of like my take on it.
Well, my plug for mental health awareness now is, because through the years I've been sober. When Trudy got pregnant with Cam, I stopped drinking. And then this thing called 9/11 happened, which really had an impact on the airline industry and all that. So I started getting back into drinking, and now I've been sober for over 9 years. And I went to see a counselor with some encouragement from my wife. And within the first 5 minutes of sitting down with him, I was on the couch crying like a baby because I had just told basically what I told you guys and just let it all out. And I guess just being in a quiet room with somebody that is professional just gave me that chance, probably to let out everything that I've been holding in for years. And it was very good. It was like, I don't know, it was just from there on in talking about how alcohol affects the body and about stress and anxiety and all that stuff. So anybody who's going through any kind of traumatic thing, I always suggest, I said, listen, counseling. If it isn't working, then try another counselor. But I am really a big advocate for people trying to get help and not to have any kind of stigma. And I'm hoping that by, a big, godlike person like me, godlike figure saying this, maybe other people say, well, hell, if he went to it, then maybe I should do it. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I think the more of us that go out there and not have shame about it and just try to get some help, I think the better it is for a lot of people, because I just think people are hesitant to get help.
So. Yeah, I know. I definitely am. What do you find that's so helpful about therapy? Just being able to talk about it in the space, or what do you think is the mechanism, I guess, that allows you to get a benefit?
I don't know what it was that set me off like that for that. Nothing that he said, like, in Goodwill Hunting, he didn't come up to me and say, "It's not your fault. It's not your fault." Nothing like that. I was just sitting there and just started just going through, and I guess just verbally myself saying out loud all these things that had happened in my life, and then just realizing that I'd probably been keeping a lot of this in and just told somebody in confidence, and it felt good. I've talked about things with my wife. I've talked about things with the kids and all that. But I think what was more was just the way, he explained how alcohol works on the body. And he said, you drink because you're trying to turn off the noise. And that really made a lot of sense. It's like, well, then, you've got to find something else to try to avoid the alcohol. You have to deal with things in life or simplify your life. So it was just, there were, not everything he said, made sense to me. Like I told him, I always make lists to get things done. And he says, well, you really shouldn't make a list, because once you get things done, then you're going to come up with another list to get things done. What do you really need to do? And I was thinking, like, what planet do you live on? I mean, there's always stuff to do, and make a list to do things, and I don't know. It was just my first encounter with counseling like that. So I just think being able to speak to somebody who is actually, a professional. So,
It bothers me about lists, because I used to do that for myself, and that was something I've always tried to counsel myself, like throughout my whole life, even when I was a teenager, and I had the same idea to make lists for myself, right? And I stopped doing it too, because what was bothering me was I was being haunted by the things on the list I didn't complete. And like you said, I kept making more lists because now I'm categorizing them, right? List for this, list for that. And each list had things I had done and things I hadn't done. And the things I hadn't done, like I can, even talking about it now, I can remember some of the things, from 20 plus years ago. It's like, why did I do that to myself? It's like this comedian once said, this like no name comedian on like Comedy Central one time, he's like, humans are weird. He's like, you ever do something kind of strange and then think about it for 7 years? It's like, that's so true. And like you said, the noise in your head, I mean, we're computers that can't reformat, right? As time goes on, a good memory is almost a curse, because it's just more and more data over time that you just have to, partition.
Manage. Yeah. It starts to slow down because you're just bogged down by everything. That's why one reason I'm happy, I can't remember my life at all. Like I'm horrible. I remember like my own history in my life and things that I've done and that have happened to me. But like I'm really good at like remembering facts about like random things. So like that's something that's very, very useful. It's like, forgive and forget, they say. It's like, well, it's super easy to forget when you forget everything.
Or, I think I told you guys the joke about Irish Alzheimer's is where you forget everything except the grudge.
Yeah. I think that's where Tolkien got his idea for dwarves, if you ask me. When dwarves have, this like infinite book of grudges. It's even called that in other genres. It's like, yeah, that's got to be an Irish thing for sure, or a Bulgarian thing maybe. It could be a Slavic thing.
Yeah.
So I'm absolutely fascinated. I've got so many questions, Pete.
Go ahead.
Let me get, if you got, go fire off if you got one, because I'm trying to get back on track here. But you talked about, so were you okay? So you were married when? You got married while you were in the military?
Yes, I was. Trudy and I were 23 when we met, and we got married at 25.
Oh wow, okay.
And
I don't know why that's that's just amazing to me.
well, I was based up in Brunswick, Maine, flying P3s at a Naval Air Station Brunswick, and she's from Lisbon Falls, Maine, and she had been teaching. I think in Moultonborough Academy up on Lake Winnipesaukee, and then she came home and was living at home for a while. So just a chance encounter that we met.
So there's no Tinder back then. How'd you guys hook up? Is it a romantic story?
I should have her come in here and tell her side of the story. At the Officers Club, they would have an event called Singles Night, like once a month. And eligible young ladies would come to the Officers Club. They'd get a pass to come on base. The guys would show up there. And it's just a chance to meet people because, they knew what, the women would know, who they're meeting. They're meeting, Navy pilots, naval officers. But my wife thought that Navy officers were old guys, and she had been to the enlisted men's club a couple of times dancing because they have a nice discotheque floor, the kind that would light up different colors. She was a dancer. She liked disco dancing. So she went out to the O Club one night with her friend, and she was like the wing woman. And it ended up that my executive officer introduced us to each other, and we just started talking. And I said, what do I have to do to get a date with you? And she said, you have to earn enough points. And so I said, how do I get points? And she said, well, if you dance, if I like the way you dance, you get a point. You say something cute, you get a point. So I was like, I was like a puppy dog in her hand. She had this long, beautiful blonde hair. Just she was the goddess coming in that night. And I couldn't believe that I was actually talking to her one-on-one and nobody else had tried to break in or anything like that. So anyway, we danced, we chatted and all that. And at the end of the night, I said, so can I get your phone number? And she said, no. And so we left, and that was it, right? So for some reason in conversation, she mentioned her father's name, first and last name. And so back in those days, they had this thing called a phone book that you could go into, And so I looked up her father's name, and I called her, and she said, well, since you're smart enough to figure out my phone number, I'll give you enough points. At the end of the night, she said I didn't have enough points to go out with her. So now she said, you have enough points. And so we started dating, and it just went on from there. So
that's a really great story.
And we met on Friday the 13th, which was a good omen. And
yeah, so it's a lucky thing.
And when we got engaged, it was up there in Maine. There's this place called Land's End on Bailey Island. So we went down there. I had a bottle of champagne in the car. I had asked her to marry me. She said yes. So we turned on the radio to see what the song was at the time. And the song that came on was Another One Bites the Dust by Queen. So by Friday the 13th, canceled out by Another One Bites the Dust, and it all worked out. So it's been great. It's great. She's my best friend. She's the love of my life. I just feel very fortunate that I had met her. So it's probably one of the things that really did save me. I think if I hadn't met her, I may not be here right now. And of course, by meeting her, I've got my two great sons, Cam and Jake. So I feel very fortunate, to have met her and to have a family with her. So it's a nice thing.
That is fortunate, man. Yeah, that is great. So weird segue.
Right.
I really wanted to ask you about what it was like to be a pilot back in 2001 for after September 11th, or even during, like, what were you in a plane when everything was going, when the terrorist attack was happening?
No, I was actually out.
Talking about that?
I was out on a bike ride with another pilot friend, and we decided to stop at a local place to get coffee and bagels. And somebody was standing in line and said, "Did you hear what happened?" No, what? He said, "Yeah, an American Airlines flight just flew into the World Trade Center." So we looked at each other and went back to my house to catch the news just in time to see the United flight going into the South Tower. So we were just shocked. The next thing we did is said, we better call the school and tell the kids, just to confirm that they know that Dad wasn't flying. So we did that.
Yeah.
And it was like, how did this happen? And so as things started evolving, or like information started coming out, it was like you used to try to accommodate the hijackers because, they wanted to go to Cuba and everybody lived. Nobody thought they were going to use them as, weapons of mass destruction like they did. So it shook up the industry, no flying, reduction in flights, new procedures. And it just changed the airline industry completely. And I think we're getting back from that. And then of course the pandemic happened, but there were guys that were stuck overseas because the flight's been canceled. And there were people stateside who just tried to get home, rent a car or get a train so they could be back home with their families because nobody really knew what was going to happen next. So we slowly got through it. And there was just a reduction in force. They had to furlough pilots. So that meant everybody kind of moved backwards in their seats. There were pay reductions. We eventually went into bankruptcy, which was more damage to the employees and all that. So it's just kind of just a terrible time. And we got through it, but it's just amazing. what those guys were able to pull off was just incredible. That they knew how to do this and that they were actually trained to fly the planes into the towers. And nothing was better than the people that were on the Shanksville crash plane, and they actually went into the cockpit to try to take matters into their own hands. And if that isn't something that we should all be doing nowadays, is try to do a little bit more about things that are going on, at least in this country. It was really something that these people knew what happened on the other 3 flights, and they took it upon themselves to crash through the cockpit and try to get control of the airplane. And if they had only been able to do that, it would have been fantastic. But at least they stopped them from flying into something else and continuing with their mission. So
I think that's the kind of scenario that, I mean, even I run through my head. It's like, what would you do? How could you? Because I feel like I intervene even on a small level with things. Like, it's just part of my character, and I wish I didn't. Like, sometimes I get involved in other people's problems, random stranger, just because I want to see who I think the victim is stop being hurt. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I feel like it's on one hand, maybe I should just hold back, but I feel like there's certain things that we all should be intervening on. Like you see a guy trying to grab a woman's purse, like everybody should be triggered. You know what I mean? Almost like Manchurian Candidate. Like we should all be policemen in that moment. You know what I mean? Like, why aren't we? And it is very strange. Like, do you think that's an empathy problem? Do you guys think that's like just a sign of the times because of our disconnection in some way due to technology? Or
I was going to say the last thing that anybody should be doing is getting their freaking phone out and start videotaping it.
That's what they are doing.
And that's what they're doing. They're just, it's like these kids, watching these fights in school and assaults, and they're all filming it. Or the stupid ones that are filming them, stealing or doing, committing a crime. But I don't know what it is. That's a good question. People that step up and try to do what's right. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is or why people are like that. I don't. It's sad. I don't know why people.
Well, I think most people are cowards. They don't want to interact in a conflict. They just want to stay out of it. They don't want to put themselves at risk.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the major reason. I don't think it has to do with morality or technology, holding us back. I think it's just people are afraid to do anything.
So everyone makes. Sorry, go ahead.
I think I read something recently. I'm trying to think what the whole story was, but instead of screaming for help, you're more likely to get more attention if you yell fire, or there's something else that like people
rape or not. Yeah, fire instead of rape. That kind of thing.
Something like that. That you'll get more help than if somebody's asking for help. So I don't know. Maybe it's just there's too many people in the world competing for resources, and they just don't care. They just they don't want to get involved. They would just want to get back on their social media or whatever, or just get back to their home and be protected.
I have a conspiracy or a theory for it. I think because there was do either of you remember a science fiction show in the 90s called Sliders?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so Sliders is still like probably my all-time favorite like sci-fi show. And they had an episode where in one it was about alternate Earths, right? So think like Marvel Universe or DC. So on one alternate Earth, lawyers like litigation and liability was through the roof, right? In America. And so people were being sued over every little thing, like the position of a sugar packet on a table. Like it was ridiculous,
Wow.
right? And that was like the joke. That was like the run-on joke for that episode. But things did get worse as far as like liability is concerned in terms of like what we need to be more careful about. And I think that baked itself in to my generation and the generation since, because I like that's changed my mindset over time, like over the last 20-30 years. Like I've changed the way I feel about what I could get in trouble for, right? And like if you go to help put out a fire, there's a lot less liability, right? You're less liable for what might happen as far as interactions are concerned with other people, because everything is recorded, it almost works against you. I feel in some way like you could be actually made to look guilty because you can be taken out of context, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't matter that there's an hour and a half of you putting out a fire. Someone could just borrow 30 seconds or 20 seconds of where you were arguing with the owner or the neighbor or something. You know what I mean? Like it's so bizarre the world we live in.
The amount of surveillance.
Yeah, the amount of surveillance and the amount of lying, the disingenuous. Like I said, everything's always taken out of context. That's why I try not to get upset when I'm on like TikTok or some other social media like YouTube, where they give you these quick clips or quick reels, and you see like, let's say like a cop beating someone or struggling to fight someone and get them down to the ground or whatever. And then right away, what does your PC brain say to you? Like, oh, that's police brutality. But I don't know the story. Like, I don't know
Right.
what that perp is doing, or what maybe that was a murder. We just finally caught him. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
you don't know. So
There used to be a commentator, Paul Harvey. I don't know if you remember him, but it'd be,
the name is
you know so and so, but now you'll hear the rest of the story, and then he would have the background information about stuff, and it'd always be some kind of twist, like, oh, I didn't know that, But you're right. You only get the clip. It's just like I think the only way you can have a fair media is any kind of issue. List the pros and cons. I mean, each side is just trying to get their side out there, or accusing the other side of something. It's to get to the facts and to sort it out, and to show people, okay, these are the pros of this, these are the cons. This is what the Republicans want. This is what the Democrats want. And most of the time, I think, why don't we just split it in the middle? And it's like, no, there is no middle ground anymore. To compromise is weakness, and so
it's become more tribal, I would say. I mean, are you a political person? Do you think that our society is becoming more censored, or that has suffered a lot from censorship in general, especially over like the last 4 years, let's say?
I think so, because I think it's tricky, because there's free speech, but you can't have hate speech. So is there free speech or not? And I think these kids on college campuses protesting because there's a conservative commentator coming to speak on campus and then canceling that person. I don't think that's right. I think the cancel culture, I think we're going a little too far to one side, and that backfires. That turns off a lot of people. So somebody said you should, if you want to be an advocate for freedom of speech, then you have to find the most vile thing that somebody else is doing and defend it. Because you want to be able
like
to
Voltaire,
get his opinions. And I don't know. I think social media has contributed a lot to it, because things can spread so fast without being checked, or just put out there as the real thing, and it's not. A lot of deep fakes, things like that. So it's, trying to gather all the information. Who's got time for that? We're all used to like 10-second TikTok videos, or just a caption. I mean, who has time to filter all the stuff to get all the information behind just one news story? So,
yeah, that's my problem with trying to be political in any way, is that like there's so many different angles and so many different people having their different viewpoints, and then I gotta figure out, what is your political leaning, why are you saying what you're saying, how much of it is true, how much of it is opinion based, what are like the bare bones facts, and then it turns into like a full-time job just trying to get, like you said, one story out of it. It's like I don't have time for that. I have a million other things I need to do. Like that is my least of my like priority list.
Yeah, I think an unavoidable fact too is that the public forum, right, the way we all communicate our opinions, is privately owned, right? So like Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, all social media is privately owned, which allows them to censor or throttle the data that comes to them however they like. And I think that's really that's the main problem with our conversation with a stranger or someone on the internet, is that the forum is privately owned, whereas before, I think you could say at least it was contested, right? I mean, obviously we don't own these large, powerful technological things, right? We're just the labor force, or however you want to look at us. But I think that plays the biggest part. But I mean, do you think that, I keep coming back to I keep coming back to the fact that you're a pilot, because I wanted to be a pilot when I was a kid, and I'm really jealous. You mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that you felt lucky that you knew what your focus in life was going to be when you were very young. Does that just feel like luck to you? I mean, what do you attribute that to? Do you feel like were your parents responsible for that, or are you responsible for that? Is it just luck? Was it the universe aligned? Was it Friday the 13th?
I think I think it was, like I said, the exposure to a couple of things. The Hayden Planetarium, thought that was the coolest thing. Seeing rockets and meteorites and the display of the solar system, everything they had in there, I thought was fantastic. They had several different scales where you could see what your weight would be on the different planets, which I thought was incredible.
Oh, that's cool.
Didn't really understand, why the weights would be different until later when I took physics, But then you go to see the planetarium show, and you're in the city with light pollution. You can't get a clear view of the sky anywhere, right? But you go in here, and all of a sudden you're in space. It was the coolest thing, and just I don't know. Just I go back to this. I would stand on the street corner in the Bronx as a kid, and I watched the airplanes flying overhead, and I would always look up. Not all the kids did that, but I would always look up and see that. And I said, wow, that'd be cool to do that someday. And then my first time at American Airlines flying into LaGuardia, I'm flying over the freaking Bronx, and I'm thinking, holy shit, it came true. I wanted to do this, and it happened. So
that's such a fun realization.
I don't know. I think I'm proud to say that I'm odd. I'm different. Okay, I'm not a foodie. I eat to live. I don't like a lot of fancy stuff. I'm not a big consumer and all that. This experience is worth more than going out to a French restaurant or buying a new bike or something like that. This is what I really enjoy. So I don't know. I just had focused on being a pilot. Whenever I rode my bike, I pretend I was flying. If I was with a friend, get him into formation. All right, go into a left echelon, right echelon. I don't know. I just really, 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 wanted to do it, and I just thought it'd be cool.
That's so cool.
And as I got, I knew you had to get good grades, so I was a good student. Enjoyed math and science and all that, so I was a good student. Wasn't a varsity athlete, but relatively good shape, which you need to be. So I did a lot of running, and lifting weights at the house and all, and just read up on it. So nowadays kids say, "Oh, you're a pilot. I want to be a pilot too." I said, "Okay, well, do you know about the different ways to do it?" And try to give them the information about, going the private pilot route or going into the military, and different aspects of which military to go into and all that stuff. So, the information is out there. And right now is a great time for somebody to want to become a pilot because there was such a hiring boom when I got hired, and we were all about the same age, and now we're all retiring. So with the retirements, the people let go for the pandemic, and then just fly, more people are flying each year. There's a big demand for pilots. So they've raised the salaries for the regional pilots. So they're more enticed to go in and fly because the pay used to be terrible. It's like, why pay all this money to get my ratings, and then I'm having to sleep at the airport and all that. So they're making improvements in the entry level positions because everybody wants to get to that major airline job as an airline pilot. So
they're even
go ahead.
They're even recruiting. I've seen YouTube ads, both the clickable and the recorded live commercials. And I asked a friend of ours who's an airline stewardess because I'm 40 now. She's like, are they can you go and become a pilot at 40? She said, yeah. So apparently, as long as I guess you'd have to get obviously the testing I'm sure is rigorous, but they'll even put you through the training, the schooling, and everything. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it must be a boom right now to become a pilot.
It is, and like I said, there's probably an initial investment if you're going. We talk about the civilian or the military route. The advantage to the civilian route is you can get into the flying position sooner because everything in the airline industry is based on seniority, which is based on what you got hired. Whereas the military, they know that these guys want to get out and fly for the airlines, so they've got a longer commitment. So you've got to be in the military for 10 years. So you've lost 10 years of seniority. But guys still get out of the military, but they have to say, okay, do I go to the airlines now or do I get another 10 in and get my 20-year retirement and then maybe go to the airlines? So, there's trade-offs to either one. So, but no, I just always like flying. And the funny thing is, I really don't care if I fly again. I've gone up in a private airplane. I think we talked about this when we went to the concert. I've gone up and it's fun and I enjoy it. But like I said, I could never get a job better than the position I had as a captain at American Airlines. Ultimately flying the 767 and all that support behind you and the destinations and all that. Anything else would be a step down at this point. So.
What is it like flying that kind of a plane, like that just mammoth beast, this heavy ass thing in the sky. I'm
Yeah, it's
ignorant. I'm not.
insane.
I'm a peasant, right? So explain it to me. Like, I mean, if you had to, if like pretend you're me, and I mean, how profound is it? I mean, I'm sure it was profound to you, but what is it like flying that plane? Almost feels like, forgive again my ignorance, but almost like the plane flies itself in some way. Like how did you go from? Explain it, I guess. How does it
All right.
feel?
The first time I flew an airplane was in flight school. I was flying the T-28 Trojan, which was a post-World War II fighter trainer, big reciprocating engine. And as soon as you added power, you had to start putting in a lot of right rudder to counter the torque of the prop. I believe it's called P factor. Now, back in the Vietnam War, the Vietnamese pilots were learning to fly these airplanes, and they would get airborne and let that right rudder out, and the plane would do what they call a torque roll and roll over. So the fear of God was put into you. You have to keep right rudder in here, right? So you had to do that. You get airborne, and now you're going through all these procedures. It's overwhelming at first. And then as you build time and you move up into the P3, which is pretty cool, 4-engine turboprop, you're advancing and with technology and how better the airplanes are, because the airlines get the newer technology before the military usually. So I was going through training to fly the MD-80, which was the old DC-9 that they stretched out. Digital flight guidance system, auto land, all this. I thought it was in the space shuttle. But then when you went from the Super 80 to the 75 to the 76, it's like, holy cow, this is even better. They'd have not just lateral navigation, but vertical navigation, where the plane would automatically descend after you programmed it to make these crossing restrictions. It was like PFM, pure freaking magic on these airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
And now I never flew the 777 or the 787, but you lose an engine, the thing automatically puts in some rudder for you, and it does all these things. So it's gotten to the point where they worry that pilots are losing some of their flying skills because the airplanes do so much. So some of the guys, they click off the automation. Like everybody says, so what do you do when you put on the autopilot? Well, you take off without the autopilot. You get airborne, you hand fly it. Some guys like to hand fly up to 3,000. Some like to go to 10,000. Some like to go all the way up to cruise altitude. It's just a matter of preference. And then the autopilot's on in flight. And then descending, same thing. Some guys wait till they get down, 20,000 feet, 10,000, 3,000. Some guys leave it on until 300 feet above the runway and click it off, because the reason being that the airplane is doing all this stuff and you can monitor what's outside, the transmissions. It raises your awareness elsewhere. You're not focused on the airplane, but sometimes you rely too much on the automation. So you always have to be checking it and making sure, it's acting properly. So I don't know if I answered your question, but the planes.
Oh, I got several more, but go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Zach. I can tell he's loaded. He's loaded.
Do like my I guess does malfunctions happen a lot with autopilot? Like, does that ever happen or occur? Like where things are supposed to be like on track, but then like the sensor doesn't work or whatever?
It might happen once in a while. You go to turn it on and then it clicks right off. And a lot of times the airplane is not in what we call the trim condition. Guys just put it on, but then the airplane is still trying to trim the aircraft up. Like as you speed up, you need to trim in more nose down because of aerodynamics and all that. So you just click it back on. It happened a couple of times in the P3 at 200 feet, and that gets your attention because you're tracking the submarine or getting ready to take pictures of a ship, and then the autopilot clicks off. You're only 200 feet off the water, so you would get on
you're very high.
Your hands are always on the controls. You're always monitoring the controls, when it's on. But no, it's the technology, the manufacturers, what they've made. It truly is amazing when you look how far these planes can fly on one engine, and they haven't even been in the air yet, and they had the engine certified to go these long distances for the international flights. And if you see them auto land, it's just incredible what they've designed and how efficient the engines are. So like I said, we all have a lot of faith in the technology, but once in a while, it doesn't work right. A lot of times it's operator error. Sometimes it's just, goblins in the avionics, as we call it sometimes. And, you reset things and then it works, so, and you have backup systems to help you too. So for the most part, though, it works. But
Did you ever have anything go really wrong and you had to, I don't know, lie to the passengers of the plane, or like downplay the severity of a moment just to, keep the civility and the calmness and of the situation under control?
I There's been a couple of times. Usually, it's delays that you deal with passengers. One time in flight, we hit some turbulence, and fortunately, the seatbelt sign was on. None of the passengers were up and about in the cabin, but the flight attendants were. And I made an announcement to take your seats immediately. And so the flight attendant up front got into her seat right away. The other two were in the aisle with the cart, so they sat down. And the one in the back was trying to get the others to come back to her, and that's when we hit one bump, and she ended up hitting her head. And so we had to make an announcement, tell passengers there wasn't going to be any service, and then we got to Phoenix and arranged for medical services and all that stuff. So that was about the most serious event that I had. And
Oh, and you had to land the plane early or at a nearest like airport because of the injury?
we decided to press on. We could have gone into Las Vegas, and I just thought the best thing to do was get them to Phoenix because you get the passengers where they not wanted to be. Somebody had already looked at the flight attendant, and she wasn't in any danger. She had bumped her head, so we just needed to get it checked out. So I just thought the best thing to do was to go. I think we're leaving from it may have been Fresno or Sacramento. It wasn't a very long flight, but I elected to press on because I thought there'd be more support for us at Phoenix because that was an American Airlines base, and the flight attendants would have support there as well. But no, I would never. No, I never lied to the passengers. Always felt that they wanted to know what was going on. So if anything, I always try to keep them informed. Like I said, especially with departure delays. And for the most part, my flights all got to their destination, except for the few times there was weather at the destination. You had to go to an alternate. And people are understanding. I mean, it's the weather. You
Yeah.
can't control the weather. So
I mean, what are you going to do? You're sitting in an airplane.
Yeah, you're kind of at the mercy. You have no.
I don't approve of this turbulence.
Have you ever flown a helicopter before?
I've flown in a helicopter, but I've never actually flown a helicopter.
What are the major differences between a helicopter and like the kinds of planes you've flown? Like, do they translate at all?
The only way you can fly a helicopter is if you can pat your head and rub your belly. Can you guys do that? Pat your head. Let's do it now.
Yeah, I
Come
can
on,
do
pat
it.
your head and rub your belly.
I
Can
used
you
to
do it?
practice this to impress
There you
myself.
go. There you go. You start patting that belly or rubbing your head. No, you get your hands full with the helicopter. They're a little more difficult to fly, but like anything else, once you've had enough training in them, you'll get you get used to it. But I just think it's a little more complicated because you've got the stick, the rudders, the collective, the throttle. So there's a little more going on there to maintain balanced flight. But helicopters are pretty cool. The helicopter rides I've had, I've always enjoyed them. They were kind of fun. Want to hear about the helicopter dunker?
Dude, I want to hear it all.
So when you're going through flight school, your first phase is aviation indoctrination. So there's a lot of classes on aeronautics, engines, power plants, just different things, how planes work, how they fly, and all that. They show you some motivational movies, like one called Ramp Strike, where it's nothing but planes crashing onto aircraft carriers, and then the instructor says, we can't have marginal performance at the aircraft carrier. You have to know and all that. So anyway, then you went through a whole, water survival. And one of the things you probably saw it in An Officer and a Gentleman, if you ever saw that movie, the Dilbert Dunker. It's just a mock-up of a cockpit. It slides down these rails into the pool, and it flips upside down. And you have to wait a few seconds for the bubbles to clear. You disconnect, and you push yourself out, and you escape. So that's to simulate if you do a water landing and the plane flips over. Well, they found out that a lot of people were dying in helicopter crashes because the crews were getting the training. They knew how to get out. The window was right here for the pilots. But the crews in the back in the tube, they didn't have any kind of training whatsoever. So they started putting all the air crew through the training. So what this is a big cylinder. It's a mock-up of a CH-46 helicopter. It's got a long tube. It's got the two pilot seats up front. And it drops into the water, and then it will rotate because you've got the rotors up on top, so it's heavy, so it's going to rotate. Well, sometimes it rotates 90 degrees, sometimes it rotates 180, goes around, comes back around. So you have to wait until the motion stops, all right? So it's not too bad the first couple of times you do it until they give you the goggles that are blacked out. And now you're training to be in a nighttime scenario where you crash in the water. And now you have to reach for reference points. And so if you don't get the right reference point, like I did the first time, you're going to be smashing your head into a wall, and then a Navy diver is going to pull you out. And if you don't get it the next time, which is your last chance, you got to go to what we call stupid swim for the rocks, okay? The guys that can't swim are rocks, right? So got in there and just got a different seat because they always rotate you around. So it's a lot easier. Going out of the pilot, window is right there. So that was an eye opener to know that could happen, because they use the helicopters to transport crews back and forth. So a lot of times, if somebody doesn't survive now, it's the poor passenger who's never gone through the training. But we all have life there, so hopefully, the crew helps them out. So, but that was just one of the fun things they do. They used to drag us behind this boat. It was a parachute harness release, and what they would do is they'd jump in the water and you'd be dragged. It was to simulate being your parachute filling up with air and dragging you across the water. So you'd have to get out of your fittings. Well, we would call it trolling for sharks, because you're out in the bay and they're dragging you along. You get disconnected. You would get your life raft inflated. You get into that, and then you'd hop out. They come and take your life raft away, and then a helicopter would come by. Helicopter would pick you up, bring you up, pat you on the head, drop you back down in the water, and you get picked up again. So you really got to do a lot of cool stuff with water training in the Navy. So there's a lot.
Did you ever do the high deck dive, like off the aircraft carrier?
No.
Like that 90-foot drop?
We did the 10-foot platform. No, I don't know. I mean, I guess when the ship's on fire and you go in there, when we got no other option, right? You do the jump. But we had to go off the 10-foot platform and then swim 40 feet underwater to simulate getting underneath an oil fire and getting out. And then they also put you in the pool and they throw a parachute over you. And then you have to disentangle from that. And that's just a lot of treading water, drown proofing, and trying to get away from everything, get your lines clear, and then disconnecting. So had to do a mile swim in your flight suit and your flight boots. And that's in the pool with a bunch of other guys just going back and forth, doing laps and all that. And
that is a lot. I swam in jeans once for Boy Scouts. That is the worst thing in the world. That is so hard. You're in a flight suit swimming. That is ridiculous.
I know.
How do you move? Like,
you just do survival strokes. And it's just a slow process. Is all it is. You're definitely not gonna challenge Mark Spitz for any Olympic medals. Or I guess I'm dating myself with him. Who's there? Ryan Kotke? Is he the guy? Or I can't remember.
The only one I know is Michael Phelps. That's the only swimmer I have ever heard of.
Yeah,
but even now, I don't think he's doing anything like that anymore.
Oh, I don't know. I thought he was still swimming.
Is he really?
Yeah,
he could be. Who knows? Because he was a thing in the 2010s. I figured by now, that's done.
Well, what about you guys? When you guys were kids, when you were kids, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh man, you go ahead, Zach. You go first.
Well, I wanted to be a paleontologist at one point.
Wow, that's cool.
That's the one that really sticks out to me, that I really wanted to do. And then I wanted to be like a biblical paleontologist, because when I was a kid, I believed in God still and stuff like that. And it was like, very like, now I'm just like, I don't know. It's like, it could be there, it could, maybe not. But like back then I was like, yeah, the Bible's real, and I thought it'd be really cool to like find the Ark, like that would be like find the Ark of the Covenant, or find Noah's Ark, things like that. Like that, I think that that'd be the coolest thing, to find like proof of like the Bible's like stories and stuff like that. And then just like also like paleontology for like dinosaurs, I always thought was cool, and I thought like being outside and stuff like that was always awesome. And then eventually it turned into video games, became my love. And then I was like, well, I want to create stories for video games. I actually went to school for media arts and animation. But it's such a competitive field. I just never got my foot in the door, and I kind of fell out of practice. And now I've moved on to other things in life. But that's kind of like my progression, I guess, of my dreams as a kid.
The story in 5.
What about you, Marco?
Well, like I said earlier, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a pilot. Because early on, my dad got us into model making. So the old, like, what were they called? They started with an S. The paints were named this after the same company, but they were really intricate models for cars and planes. Some of them, and they had different levels of, like, difficulty. So you could buy the one that had like literally every part was something you had to clip, clean, and glue, right? So he got us into that, my brother and I, and he was hoping I would love, or one of us would love cars like he did, but I loved planes. I was very heavy into that. Unfortunately, it was not encouraged. My dad wasn't around to encourage it because he worked, 16 plus hour days. And the rest of the family didn't think I had what it took to be a pilot. So that was not encouraged. But I quickly after that wanted to become an artist. So I actually spent the first 20 years of my life convinced that I could be one. And if I couldn't get training or college time for it, because I tried very hard, that's another story. I figured I would just train myself. But eventually, I guess you could say I gave up on that for 2 reasons. One, the whole freelance. I was starting to actually make some money freelancing, just doing portraits. When I worked in plastic surgery, I had connections from surgeons and people I worked with, things like that. So that was kind of cool. It was great for meeting ladies. I was pulling the whole like Leonardo DiCaprio move on them, which was nice. And I had the easel set up in my studio and everything. And but that just seemed, I don't know, that was just like a fancy to me. The other thing that really kind of killed it though is when I looked more into, because I was like Zach, I was really in video game art, especially, and 2D actually more than 3D. I still to this day appreciate 2D more. But when I looked at how, not necessarily unfair, because I can handle unfairness. I'm good with, challenges and problem solving and unfair odds. What I didn't like about the industry was that it was so cutthroat, and that I think even today it's very similar. Everything was contractual as far as an artist was concerned, so there's no steady work. And you're treated really bad. I mean, there's no respect for you as a person at all. Like as far as like the hours you got to work, the deadlines you got to meet, and the competition's super high. So, you could have been like I was. I was a pretty good artist at 2021, at the age, I mean, and but there were 15-year-old, 13-year-old kids in Taiwan that blew me out of the water, and they'd work for almost nothing. I'm sure some of them would have worked for free. Even I did work for free for some small companies and my friend's company. Because you tell yourself, well, I'll just get myself out there.
Yeah,
but,
exposure.
Yeah,
right?
But it doesn't work like that.
Well, and when you're a freelancer too, a lot of employers don't realize what you're doing. Right? They don't know for art, like they don't understand that side of it. That's why they're hiring you.
Yeah.
And they don't know how hard and difficult and time consuming it really is. One of my favorite lines actually is I think it's that's not Da Vinci. It's the one whoever painted the Sistine Chapel.
Michelangelo,
right? Mm-hmm. So he was painting he was upside down painting and stuff. And one of the one of the priests come up and he's like, so when are you going to be done? And he's like, it would be finished when it's finished. I'm like, that's such a boss answer when it comes to art. It will be done when it's done. Like, yeah, it will be done when it's done.
You'll
like,
know
calm down.
Yeah.
It's like, it will be okay. And when it's done, it'll be great. So just chill.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like when it comes to freelancers, it kind of falls into that, or they just don't realize how much it takes to produce.
Another thing too, I think played a part. Well, a lot of things played a part, at least in my journey to want to be an artist. But like nowadays, so like the things that I was into was very comic book fantasy type stuff. Vampires was big with me, and superheroes and villains and stuff like that. Very dark themed stuff, which in the 80s was cool if you were a nerd, but that was totally fringe, right? But in the 90s, in the late 90s and early 2000s, all this stuff that I would have never admitted I liked in like, middle school and high school, because I would have had to deal with God knows how many jocks or bullies, right? Became cool, right? And not only cool, now the girls like it. So the events I used to go to, like in the 80s and 90s when I was a kid, it was just me, was a in the closet nerd, and then there was just obviously like totally like flamboyant nerds, right? It's making me sound kind of gay, but
I was gonna let you go, but
but in the 90s and the early 2000s, like that all flipped, and now it's totally cool, right? Who doesn't like a Marvel movie, right? Like what Gen X or millennial isn't raising their kids on Marvel, fantasy content and Lord of the Rings and Star Trek, like all that shit's cool now. It's all very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like if I was Gen X, like right now, I think um my endeavor to be an artist would probably be a better journey. Plus, I would have had way more years in digital art. Like I had to teach myself Photoshop or Blender. Those things were very technical, very difficult, and it's not. When I first started using those programs, there weren't. I mean, YouTube existed. It was the early days of YouTube, but I mean,
no tutorials
well,
for
even
Blender.
yeah, but and even if you did it with someone who was a professional, so you had to understand what the hell they were even talking
what the
about.
jargon is.
Oh yeah, it's like an engineer explaining a VCR. You're like, what? So
magnets, cool.
Yeah.
That's
So
like I was going to ask, like if you could go back now and change things or have done something different, what would you do?
I would have I latch on to what you said earlier when you knew, because your focus was so strong as a kid. That is, I think, my biggest problem as a middle-aged man is that I still have, and it doesn't get easier, right? Is focusing on something to do with your life. That's why I'm literally restarting my life right now at 40. And if I could change anything, I would change that. I would go back to the young Marco and say, at age 7 or 8, when I first got into art and first started drawing, and say, look, don't you ever give this up, no matter what happens, no matter what you face or what hurdles. Like, don't ever give this up. This is you, because I'm an entertainer too at heart. Like everything is an art to me. Singing, I do I did everything: singing, writing, acting, dancing. Like I just loved all those things, and those are things I still love. So I think that's definitely that's the advice I'd give to a younger me, for sure. Yeah.
How about you, Zach?
For career wise, I really don't know, because like it's not like I regret, going to school, because my school also went through fraud. So like my degree is kind of useless now. And I mean, I regret going to that particular school for that reason, but also I learned a lot of lessons in life going to college. So I don't regret going to school in general. I think that there was a lot of good things that came out of that. I learned how to deal with annoying people and, different situations and different things like that. And just being exposed to a bunch of things. Um, and I don't think I like, what career field would I have chosen that I could have done? It's like, what's not competitive, like there's not really, it's not like, I feel like you can't just go to school, get a degree, and then get a job in that field. Like there's like,
Well, especially with art.
yeah, especially in art. I feel like there's just not much of an option anymore. Like it's not guaranteed that you're going to get a job. So it's like, I really don't know. I would just, I don't know. I would want to change something so that it would be more useful, whatever I learned, into developing a career. But I guess the only advice I would give myself is just relax. Like, take it easy. It's okay. Things are gonna work out. Like, don't worry. Like that's mainly the thing, because I went through a lot of stress at that time, and still do through different things. It's just like, if I could just like learn how to become more zen about things, that's where I would like to get the advice for.
That's a good point. Yeah, be more zen. I think we talked about the stress and anxiety in the car, how that was explained to me, that anxiety is worrying about the engine catching on fire the whole time you're flying across the ocean. And then stress is when the engine catches on fire halfway across the ocean. So anxiety is a terrible thing, but stress, yeah, you got your stress is you have to deal with something like that. But with myself, I wouldn't have. I wish I had my drinking under control, because of all the things that I've messed up in my life, it was either under the influence of alcohol or because I was Russian. So I think we just got done. Trudy and I are reading a book called The Midnight Library. And it's something that always fascinates me. I think Cam's talked about this too. The alternate timelines, like right now, all three of us are in alternate lives. Who knows what we're doing? And those are coexisting at the same time. And then when you take your decision, you go to that. And anyway, it's kind of the theme of somebody going back and changing things in their life and then finding out that what they really thought they wanted wasn't, because of all these other things that happened, So when you think about changing things in your life, if I wasn't drinking, I may not have met Trudy at the Officers Club, because maybe I would have been somewhere else, or maybe I wouldn't have learned, certain things. So
like the butterfly effect. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, which I'm just fascinated with that whole concept that there could be another, Pilot Pete out there who's like, gynecologist Pete, or murderer Pete.
He jumped to gyno.
I like the way that sounds rough.
Yeah.
Gyno Pete.
I haven't thought about it or anything, but I'd be a gynecologist if I.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but no, I know what you're saying, because like if I didn't go to the school I went to, the college I went to, I wouldn't have met Marco, because there's no way I would have gone to medieval times after college, and then we wouldn't have this podcast, and I wouldn't be talking to you now.
Right.
It's crazy how like all these different one thing, and the further back you go, that thing becomes more significant too, it seems, because it just spawns off these different like chain reactions. It's like a nuclear explosion.
Well,
it just keeps going and spreading and going.
I liken it too, because I've thought about this conversation we're having now. I've thought about before as well, and I compare it to something I used to say about art. This is like someone asks you, well, when are you going to be done with the drawing? And you made that Michelangelo quote, but I've always said that a drawing to me is never done, or a painting, and the idea of like having that ability to just go back to the canvas, but having that ability with time, I think that's terrible, because as an artist, I wouldn't stop. Right. I'd constantly be adding a detail, especially with drawing. Like when you're drawing like anything, you can literally, it's infinite. You can just go back and add any mark you want to that drawing.
It's like if we're talking about superheroes and stuff, Kang the Conqueror, who's like he's from Marvel, and he's a time traveling conqueror pretty much. He just takes over people and planets and all that stuff, but he's like gone back in his own timeline several times trying to make himself better and save the girl that he loves, and like doing different things, and like he finds out that he's inevitably going to become the bad guy. No matter what he does, he's always going to be the bad guy, and he doesn't want to be the bad guy. And it's kind of
that's sad.
It's just like that chain reaction thing.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about art and just the whole nature of somebody's creativity. I don't know if we all have creativeness in us or not, but when I see what people can do, whether they're making little sculptures out of hardware, or coffee pots for vacuum cleaners, or how somebody can draw. I mean, I've got like maybe if I'm lucky, a third grade drawing ability right now. In Pictionary, it's hilarious because the pictures are so terrible. Whereas Trudy is taking her time and making these nice drawings. It's like, well, we lost because you're still drawing your masterpiece. But whether it's somebody singing, playing the guitar, the idea for a play, something like a script that's totally different. I really have an appreciation for that. So like in the back of my mind, I would like to be, I would love, it'd be cool to get into writing screenplays or performing. I had the acoustic guitar out a couple of weeks ago. Friends had a party for Labor Day. And so just getting back to doing the sing-along stuff. It used to be like that in the Navy. We'd be sitting around outside drinking beer outside our quarters, and somebody would go into my room, grab the guitar, hand it to me and say, Pete, make up a song about us. And right off the top of my head, I'd start doing some blues riff and making lyrics up about people and all that. But just, I really appreciate what people can do on their creative side. It just blows me away. Trudy with her gingerbread houses, like Jake getting into growing mushrooms, Cam when he was doing his miniatures and all that. I think that needs to be more encouraged. We certainly have enough coverage of sports and politics. Not to take anything away from that. Athletes are great. I can't do triathlons or marathons like that. Good for them. But more attention to brain power, I think. There's a lot of smart kids out there that should get recognition for what they're doing. They're going to be the ones that are going to solve all the problems we're facing. And thinking outside the box, just these innovative things. It seems like Elon Musk is the only person who's coming up with these crazy ideas. I mean, he's the only person that's thought about the Boring Company and going to Mars and peace treaty or how to settle, maybe, and I'm not saying we're talking about
Right.
Taiwan is all that great to Ukraine and all that, but I mean, he comes out with this stuff. Where's everybody else coming out with their solutions? This Ukraine-Russia thing should have been handled in peace negotiations by now.
Yeah.
Just
I think that's really weird that we don't hear anything about that too.
really.
Well, I mean, I haven't heard
was
any news about
no,
negotiations.
yeah, it's been really weird with Ukraine because like Ukrainian war came right out of COVID, right? So it was the news covering was always covering COVID, and then it went into BLM and alongside COVID, and now it went to Ukraine war, and it was just massive. It was just everywhere. Everywhere you looked, it was talked about, and then like within a month, it was no one's talking about Ukraine. It's like, what in the world? It's not done. It's not over. It's like, what is happening? Like that's one of the things.
Attention shift.
Yeah, the attentions and like the media. It's like it just doesn't make sense to me. It's like, what are you following that, and like what really matters? And like I don't know. I feel like there's always some kind of hidden agenda. Maybe that's just my inner conspiracy thoughts. There's always someone's trying to get their piece of the pie and trick you into giving it to them.
Well, what my dad said to me? He asked me a question when I was real young. He's like, because I was really into history when I was younger. I thought actually at some point I might even study because I had a really good history teacher. And he's like, okay, you like history, right? He says, you read about all these kings, these rulers, Solomon and all these great people that had a lot of money and a lot of power. And he asked me, what happened to their money and their power? And I said, well, I don't know. I guess they lost it. He shook his head. He says, no, it didn't. They didn't lose it at all. It's still there. It's still here today. And what he meant was that like it just got transferred, right? That's what like built in my head, right? The wheels started like turning about what is power and how does it move and how does power give itself up? And I'm of the mind that it doesn't, right? So the idea that like we have elections, for example, in this country every 4 years, and that the people just democratically choose who gets to hold the wand and sit in the throne, so to speak, as the president, let's say, is just that's the only effect, that's the only factor in deciding that. I just don't agree with. I don't think that's true. I think that obviously it's not, right. We have lobbyists and corporate. There's plenty of evidence that people are manipulating our government since there were governments probably. But just that idea that blew my mind at a young age, the idea that power doesn't go anywhere. It just gets conquered. In other words, it's taken. It's not given away for free.
It's kind of like the law of energy, right? You cannot create or destroy energy. It's the same thing with wealth and power. It just moves. It's like you're not really creating more wealth or more power. You're just taking
matter
it away
in the universe.
You're just taking it away from reallocation, if you will.
Yeah, reforming. Does that sound like bullshit to you?
No. I think of is it the Serenity Prayer? Help me to change the things I can, accept things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference between the two. And I always talk about, well, what can you do? We can't stop the war in Ukraine. I think first you got to take care of yourself, then take care of your family, and branch out that way. But I mean, I haven't written to my representatives to express my opinion about things. I mean, usually a squeaky wheel gets the oil, and that's where the PACs come in, the lobbyists and all that. So that's what's going on. I mean, we just don't. I think the average citizen doesn't really have a voice.
Oh no.
So
no. Yeah, I mean, what do I really know? Well, sometimes I get lost existentially. It's like, well, what do I really know about anything? You know what I mean? Like, what am I really confident about? I don't get lost too long in that state of mind, but I agree. I think if we were to talk about flaws, I would say I think a big flaw of my personality is the fact that I like to think, and I aim my thinking power a lot on things I have no effect on, right?
Yeah.
So I'm really I'm just an amateur philosopher is what I am.
That's what's great about our shows. We get to get those thoughts out. We get to, think creatively. That's my favorite thing about it.
I agree. Yeah, that is the best thing about podcasting. And I'm so glad that we finally started doing this 2 years ago, because actually Pete was asking me before the show. He's or no, I'm sorry, not Pete. The girl, this woman I just met.
I sometimes get confused with girls. Yeah.
What's that?
Sometimes I get confused with girls when I'm really dressed up.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Sure you do. But I wish I had started this years ago, and I wanted to, right? But it was like Zach said, if I'd have never met Zach and become friends, then I never would have asked him, like, let's just do this. Like, we have these long conversations. We should be recording it,
Yeah.
So that's how this started. And where it's going to go, I don't know. But one thing I do know is that I believe, at least, and I think there's evidence for it too for everybody, is that when you just keep doing something, I think eventually some success will find you. You know what I mean? You will find it. Let's call it satisfaction, because that to me in life is like the ultimate thing. I don't really want love. I want satisfaction. I want satisfaction. I want respect. Those things to me are much more permanent, because love just kind of comes and goes. I mean, even with people that you love or say that you love, right? You're not in a constant state of fawning, right? You love them in moments. That when events occur, or tender moments between you, let's say if it's between you and your SO, that kind of thing. But really it's respect that I think keeps a good relationship strong and lasting. And that's just the way I look at
Well,
it.
you say satisfaction and respect. Satisfaction, I think, comes from within. So, like with me, it's like, oh, that's good enough. That's good enough. Some people have, want it to be more perfect, or some people don't even give a crap. But yeah, with respect, also, it's like I try to respect others. So I would expect that too. But if they don't respect me, then they can go F themselves. It's like, you
Right.
know,
No, for sure, it's a two-way street.
but I think that's what we're lacking. This whole thing, this conversation, it reminds me of being in the cockpit, and I call it the cockpit, not the flight deck anymore. It's the cockpit. And we'd always talk about how we'd solve all the world's problems because we were having rational discussions, realized that it revolved around compromise, that there were good and bad to both sides, and we could always talk something out. And if somebody was a different opinion, it might just get to the point and say, you know what, let's just talk about something else. But we've lost that. I think one side feels that they lose something, the other side gains, and it's the zero sum game, and that's not good. And so I just
Well,
I feel bad about
we've
it.
become more tribal, I think. I mean, we're always gonna be tribal. I don't think that's actually, I never hear that brought up into, I listen to a lot of conversations and interviews about like artificial intelligence, and I never hear any intellectual, scientists bring this up. It's this: why is no one worried that AI might become tribal? Like, if we are the gods, if we are the inventors of eventually an intelligence that will be strong, smarter than us, like our last invention, as they say, right? So if we're capable of that, if it's inevitable, why is no one worried that it itself may be tribal?
I subscribe to Wired magazine. I get their articles online as well. They have talked about it, AI becoming racist already. So it still has to get programmed, right? I mean, eventually it's going to, I guess, be able to access everything and then make its own decision. But right now, who's working on it? Mostly guys. So there's probably even misogyny in there too. But yeah, it's
I don't know. When you look at the mathematical engineers that work in AI, if there's ever a gray slate of a person, man, I mean, that is the last guy I'd be worried about throwing a punch. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not worried about toxic masculinity in technical engineer or mechanical engineers. Let's put it that way. But no, I was gonna say, what I guess what I meant was, that's an interesting point, like like the machine being racist or like tribal with humans, but I actually meant tribal with itself, because
okay.
once it's so smart, once it passes us, let's say, once it's able to create its own intelligence from itself, right? Will it become racist with itself? In other words,
it will create hierarchies of function.
right?
Some AIs will be more capable than others, and they'll create worker drones. And they'll
Right, but will the higher echelon of AI keep the lower echelon stupid? Like, will they create their own slave force and keep them that way?
Yeah, they'll be the dumb bots that just go in place, and pick up piece, put piece, weld piece, pick up piece, put piece, weld. That I think that will always be, because it's an easier thing to make, a single-use functioning robot than it is to make a multi-purpose robot. So the robots, the AI that's making these things, will of course keep those drone bots alive, those non-complex.
No, I like
hang on a
this
second. I'm
thought.
getting a call from Cyberdyne. Just a second. Yes. Okay. We got to change the subject.
Yeah, they don't. AI doesn't like
Drone's
it.
going to be there in 5 minutes. Take out the house.
Hey, if I gotta go out, at least I went out doing what I love.
So Pilot Pete. Um,
Oh, don't say
this
we're
part
ending
is
it. Are we ending it?
no. Oh, do you want to keep going? We can keep
Yeah,
going.
as a
I
matter
got
of fact,
I
I
got.
think you probably had more questions about flying, which I feel obligated to answer more questions. But I'll just have one more for you
Well,
guys.
I'm
Okay,
really
just
curious.
one more for you guys.
Okay, all
When
right.
you were kids
Another question
playing
each at least.
football or
Okay,
basketball, anything like
I'll go
that,
first.
did you
Yeah.
say, like with me, I'd always want to be the pitcher and I was Sandy Koufax, or I was Joe Namath for the quarterback? Did you guys do that when you were kids when you were playing games? That you would say that you're the athlete, like the star athlete at the time?
I did, yeah. When I was a kid, yeah, especially before, let's say, 10.
Yeah, I never watched
Okay.
sports. I have always found them very boring to watch. I love playing sports, but I hated watching them. So I never had like an athlete as a hero or anything like that.
So when you played
Uh,
sports, like pickup games with your friends, nobody did any of your friends say I'm so and so, or
Oh, I'm sure they do like LeBron James or like Michael Jordan and things like that, but I never did because I never cared.
good for
I'm like,
you,
I want to be me. I don't want to be Michael Jordan. I want to
good
be
for
me.
you.
Like that doesn't make sense.
Okay, I'll shut up.
We had a weird
I'll shut up.
no, we had a weird rule for this is how it worked with my friends when we were little. Like if you were going to be if you were saying like you're Michael Jordan, you had to do like a Michael Jordan move. So you had to actually do like his layup or his slam, right? And the other kids, like we would all decide like if we were impressed or not, or what you had to do to prove it. So if you impressed us by copying a move of the athlete you said you were, then you were that athlete. So you had to like kind of earn
That's
it,
good.
you
I
know.
like that.
But we did that with everything. Like
Respect.
we used to love making up games.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So like even if we were doing like pretending we were Star Wars characters, like oh you're gonna be Darth Vader, well then you're the head badass. Let's see what you got. You can't just walk around with a sign that says Vader. That's not fair.
That's a step up. Yeah, like we wouldn't. That's good. Kind of keeps everybody on their toes. Like yeah, you're
Yeah.
gonna talk.
Well, that's what we
You
like to do,
talk the
especially
talk.
with
You got to
me.
walk the walk.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, I even now I'm that way. I love challenging people, especially the people that I care about. I'm sure they hate it sometimes, but I just can't help myself.
I just like making people think about whatever they say. So if you have like an idea, and I know it's not fully formed, it's like, well, talk it out. Like I'm gonna make you question your own ideas. I like doing that.
So one thing I wanted from you, Pete, was or I wanted to ask you, and then maybe if you could even do it, is did you have like just inside your head a script for what you would say or how you would like your candor and your speech when you would speak to like the cabin while you're flying the plane, so the passengers on the plane? Did you have something like a go-to way of how you said things? Can you do it now? Can you give us
Sure. And the first thing is they did give you some guidelines. You were supposed to try to avoid humor because what some people think was funny, other people wouldn't. All right. So I'd always have to try to make sure I didn't, push it too far with something funny, trying to be funny. Um, Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, from the cockpit. Captain Brown speaking. Welcome aboard for our flight today to Los Angeles. We're at a cruising altitude at 33,000 feet. I'm getting reports of smooth rides. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the seatbelt sign. While the seatbelt sign's off, feel free to move about the cabin, use the lavatories. However, I do ask to stay in your seats with your seatbelts fastened in case we run into some unexpected bumpy air. Flying time today, 5 hours, 30 minutes. We should get to Los Angeles about 10 o'clock local time, where the weather is 72 degrees, clear skies, as usual out there in California. We've got a great crew to take good care of you back there. We're going to do all we can to give you a safe, smooth, comfortable ride. So all we ask now is that you relax and enjoy the ride. I never said sit back and relax, because you can't sit back in those freaking seats unless you're in first class. So I never said sit back and relax. I said relax. And
yeah, screw first class.
yeah, I mean, as a new captain making PAs, it was some stumbling and trying to point out geographic points and all that. And somebody else said to me, you know what? They just want to know, are we going to be on time? Basically that's it. What's the weather, and are we going to be on time? People don't want to be interrupted when they used to have movies playing back there. Now they're on their own devices and listening. So really, you don't make that many announcements. You give a pre-departure announcement, welcome them on board. Welcome aboard. We're expecting an on-time departure. So I'll be back to talk to you. We're going to take good care of you. So I just try to keep it personal. If I could make a joke, I would. The old thing about well, we're past departure time. You want to know what the delay is. Well, the machine that rips the handles off your suitcases is broken, so the guys are having to do it manually. So like that. I said, nah, just kidding. we're just delayed because of flow control into Chicago. So we're going to be just a few minutes past departure time. Like I said, they said, be honest and try to keep it brief and keep them informed. And then it actually got to the point where, with these delays where people were stuck on the airplane for several hours, lavatories overflowing, no food and all that. They've got it all regimented now that you have to, provide water at a certain point. So you have to actually hit the clock and make sure you make an announcement on these timelines and give them the opportunity to deplane and things like that. So it has gotten a lot better for the passengers, and rightly so, because every time I ride back there, if anything, if the captain isn't saying something or the crew's not letting you know, it gets frustrating. So people just want to know what's going on, and so that's what I would try to do. And fortunately, most of the time, everything operated, went according to plan, which is nice. So, I'm trying to think of any.
Did you have another question?
All right, here's a good one. You like this story?
Okay.
Coming out of Orlando, going back home to Boston, nonstop flight. 7:57, getting ready to depart. Flight attendant comes up, says, "Pete, one of the guys sitting in this seat right here where the boarding door was, got up and walked off the airplane." I said, "Okay." She says, "I think he may have just gotten off because he was tired of people walking by and maybe stepping on his feet." So I go up into the departure lounge. I said, "Excuse me, sir, are you on the flight to Boston with us?" He goes, "Yes, I am." I said, "Are you up here because you didn't want all those people walking by and maybe stepping on your feet?" He says, "Yes, that's correct." I said, "Okay, we're done boarding. Come on, let's get you in your seat and we'll get out of here." He says, "Okay." So he walks down, and on the 757, this was the beginning of coach. So the guy is sitting down. I make a left turn to go to the cockpit, and as I'm walking through first class, flight attendant screams out, "Pete, look what he's got. Look what he's got." And I thought, oh my God, I just let a terrorist back on the airplane, and he's going to start shooting up the airplane or something like that. So I turn around, and she says, "He's got the trophy. He's got the trophy." I said, "What?"
Oh
He's got the Red Sox World Series trophy. So there was a guy further back in the cabin, and he had the World Series trophy. And I go back there, I look at it. I said, "Is that the trophy the Red Sox just won, breaking the curse?" He goes, "Yeah." He grabs it, and he shoves it at me, and I grab it. I don't know if I told you guys this story already. And I'm like,
No.
holy cow, he just gave me this trophy. If I drop it, I'm going to be the new curse on the Red Sox. So I did what anybody would do on a flight to Boston. I held it up like that, and the whole plane started clapping because they knew what it was.
That's awesome.
I handed it back to him. I said, "Would it be okay if I guarantee it's going to be smooth, that the people come up during the flight to take a look at it?" He says, "Yeah, sure, no problem." I said, "Okay." So I fly from Orlando over Jacksonville, continue up the coast. Everybody's going to get a chance to see this thing holding all that. The guy was one of their security officers, Peter Nesbitt. I remember his name. Great guy. So now we get to Boston, saying goodbye to everybody, and he's coming out with the trophy. I said, "Man, I wish I had my camera." Takes the trophy, shoves it at me again. He says, "I'll take your picture and I'll email it to you." So I'm sitting in my seat with the trophy, takes a picture, takes the FO's picture. I said, "Thank you so much." I said, "That was great." So now he gets out onto the jet bridge, and the cleaners are out there. And he's letting them take a look at it. Like people are almost crying because it's been so long since the Red Sox won, right?
That's like the holy grail of sports.
So I'm leaving the airport, and there's a couple of troopers, Mass State troopers, say, "Hey, you guys ought to go down to gate 32. "Yeah, why is that, Cap?" I said, World Series trophy that the Red Sox just won is down there. And they looked at each other like little kids and went running down there. So now I'm driving home, and they're talking on the sports radio because the Patriots are playing, I think it was the Eagles, in Jacksonville for the Super Bowl. And they're trying to say, what's your prediction and how you're going to back it up? I said, I just guarantee that the Patriots are going to win the Super Bowl in Jacksonville. He says, "Yeah, right. Why? Why's that?" I said, "Because I just flew the Red Sox World Series trophy over Jacksonville." He says, "Oh, that's a great story. Can you hang on the line?" I said, Yeah. So I'm getting further and further north up into cow country, New Hampshire. And I lost the signal on my cell phone before I could get back to the newscast. So I could never, finish the story. I got a letter from the guy, a picture of me with the trophy, and he said, "It took a long time for the Red Sox to do this, but we're going to do everything we can so that any fan that wants to hold this or get their picture taken with it is going to have the opportunity." And they spent the rest of that year traveling all over New England and making it available for people to see. So that was really, really kudos to the Red Sox management for doing that. So, but that was that's one of the stories I'm always asked to tell.
Dude, Dude, that is such a cool story. I mean, like, how unique, how lucky is
That says
that,
my
right? It was
favorite
on
lap
your
dance is holding
plane.
that World Series trophy in my lap in the cockpit.
Oh man, that's awesome. That's too cool.
Yeah. Well, you guys could probably come up with some pretty good PAs. There's probably things you'd like to hear the guys say. Or
I Well, I look, I'm the kind of person I'll just keep talking. I have to shut myself up. So I try to defer as often as I can to Zach or the guest just to make sure people get their thoughts out, because I literally, I think I might even have to start another podcast, which is me listening to myself.
I remember a comedian that said, yeah, it's really interesting when they say that your seats have to be in the upright position, your tray table stowed. So I'd love to hear the captain come up and, oh, folks, this is the captain. We're having a little trouble getting the landing gear down. Did somebody not stow their tray table?
Well, I remember, apparently this is a true story, but someone told me that I used to know this guy that was afraid of flying. And I asked him, like, what was the worst thing that you ever experienced on, like, I'm thinking it was turbulence or something. And he said, the worst thing I ever experienced on a plane was hearing the captain say shit. And it was all like, it just went across. I was like, yeah, that's the last thing. I'm like, you know what, dude, you just made me anxious. Like, that's the last thing I want to hear.
It's like a doctor opening your chart.
Whoops.
Yeah. Oh, doesn't look good.
Yeah, there are things you don't want to hear from there. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I just thought, man, yeah, that's spooky. Just it's a quiet cabin. There's a little bit of turbulence, and you just hear shit. So I thought that was a good answer. But no, it's not. I mean, unless you because you talked about like one of the worst things that happened. But I'm like a NASCAR fan, right? I want to know about the crashes, so I wanted to know like like what terrible things happen. But I also like stuff like that, like the story about the trophy. That's amazing. Like I'm so glad you told that story. Because I like to hear like good stuff like that too, like wholesome stories or just cool things that happened while you were a pilot. Because I mean, it's really one of the most unique jobs you can have on the planet.
For sure.
And especially, I think your path to becoming the pilot. I mean, you were a military pilot, and then you were a commercial airline pilot, and you did it your whole career. I mean, that's what you did with your life, right? I mean, that to me is so profound. I think to me that's more interesting um, than really any other version of that story. Like someone who just accidentally became a pilot, or they just watched the Blue Angels and then they signed up at the local airfield or something like that. So I think that's what is profound to me is I guess what I'm impressed by too is just your levity, like the fact that it just seemed like I'm sure you weren't always calm as a pilot. I'm sure you have a lot of most of the times it was probably very tense, right? I mean, you have all these people's lives in your hands essentially every time I'm sure you thought about that even before you started the plane up, or I mean got into the cockpit. You must have thought, like, what am I going to, the beginning of your day, what am I going to manage today? What do I have to deal with? What are my goals for safety and, the flight and things like that?
A lot of that comes down to the training. And, the Navy had an acronym, NATOPS, Naval Aviation Training and Operational Procedures Standardization, right? That's a mouthful, but it's like everything was spelled out for what we do with these different emergency procedures. When we got to the airlines, they even had like quick reference checklist, quick reference handbook, and it has just evolved so much. The training you get in the simulators, the resources you have in your iPad, the resources you have from ATC, dispatch. I mean, it's just amazing. Like I said, the support I was at the top. Anything I do now is going to pale in comparison. I mean, I love flying. I still look at the airplanes up in the air. So I know the day that I don't do that anymore, I'll be close to death. But I love hearing airplanes go overhead and look at them. I like talking about flying. But they used to say you train the way you're gonna fight and fight the way you learn to train. So you're just usually ready to go. Flight attendants are the same thing back there. We're taking off. They're already in their seats thinking, okay, if there's an emergency, this is my exit, this is what I'm going to do and all that. So the level of professionalism is really, really high. And working with that group of people, the mechanics, the agents, the other guy in the cockpit is backing you up, I mean, and so it's like, you never wanted to piss off the guy that's, cooking your food or backing you up or flying your airplane.
Yeah, no kidding.
So, yeah, we had some crashes at American before 9/11. And then right after 9/11, we had an Airbus, come out of the sky, the tail snapped off. So when that happens, you realize that, things do go wrong. And the first thing you want to know is, what happened, what caused it. So when you go back to training, they would have all these, reenactments, recreations, digital recreation of things that have happened. So you learn from the mistakes of others. The people that make the mistakes write the new procedures so it doesn't happen again. The biggest thing that can get you are distractions, and that can happen very easily. Something happens, something's happening in the back. You got a passenger disruption, and then maybe you'll miss an altitude assignment or something like that. Something benign. It's still bad. Nobody wants to make a mistake. But when you analyze aviation accidents, it's some little thing that just escalates. Like the other guy thinks this guy knows what he's doing, and you can't do that. So I always made it a point to make my cockpit open for communication. I said, say whatever you want, but just try to stop calling me nasty names or anything like that. But whatever you want to say, and that was out there right away. It's the same with the flight attendants. They could call at any time. So I just, just like we're doing right now, talking like this, it's one of the things I think we take for granted, communication, effective communication. But if we all had it, then, just think of all the solutions we could come up with, how we could we could be better just by talking to each other, especially if
it should be taught in school. I think
communication skills,
I wish, like, even public schools, while I was in public schooling, I used to think about things I wish they were teaching us, and the top two for me was communicating, how to properly communicate professionally with other people, like respectfully and professionally, and two, how to be an adult. Like, what are the things that I learned how to be an adult on my own? I'm still learning because I didn't have proper guidance when I was a young man. The whole concepts of like saving money and starting credit. I'm 40 and I'm still dealing with that shit. So like that, I think I wish they would teach that in schools, like how to manage money, like just all those things that would be important to be an adult. Instead, you learn the Hollywood movie version of world wars and revolutions and big names, and it's just statues in the mind. It doesn't really do anything for you. It makes you seem less trivial, I guess, in appearance, but it doesn't make you smart, which is just my opinion, I guess.
I think that's a great idea. As you're saying it, my mind's like, the gears are spinning. You take kids from one classroom with an upper, like the next grade. It's just two total strangers. Sit them down and try to show them how to have a conversation. Because
we in my high school we had a class called Contemporary American Thought, where we would just take current events and we would talk about them, and we would have open discussions and talk about our opinions. That was by far my favorite class I have ever taken because it was just awesome to be able to, like, it was kind of like this show. It's what it was. We were just talking about like whatever topic was going on and our ideas on it, how we would fix whatever's happening, or what we think needs to be done, if it's okay, if it's not okay, what's happening. That was awesome. That was a great class, and it taught me communication skills, like how to take other people's opinions into consideration and not just dismiss them.
That's great.
Yeah, that was awesome.
That is awesome. I wish I had that when I was in school.
And the teacher made that a class. The teacher, like, he developed it, like, and everything. This is like a small town that I grew up in. My graduating class was 45 people.
Small.
So, like, yeah.
Wow, that's a Little House on the Prairie. Goddamn.
We had electricity.
Oh.
But yeah, no. So he's been there forever, right? So maybe he had more of a leeway within the school system to be able to kind of do that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But it was such a good class.
Well, we always said that with the boys growing up. You always feel free to talk about stuff, ask questions. But if you want to do something, have your case ready to defend what you want to do. If you wanted to go do something with your friends, have it all lined up, right? Mom's going to drive, and we're going to do this, that, and all that stuff. Present your case, and then we'll make a decision based on it. But that open communication, I think, was important with the boys growing up. And people used to say, how do you raise kids where one of them wants to go to a concert with you, or where they talk to you about all these open things? So a lot of times it's just in the car. It's a captive audience, but they always knew that they could come to us, and I say, all right, I'll try to maintain my cool, and there might be consequences, but if you ever need anything, we're ready. You got to get picked up at 1 o'clock in the morning because you're in a bad situation. We'll do it. Don't try to hide it. And that openness, I think, is important. A lot of people just want to kind of squelch that. So that's why this is great.
Yeah, or they're just not aware of it. I think there are more people, in my opinion. I think there are more people that are just unaware, as opposed to those who would want to quiet it. You know what I mean? Because I like, for example, I had a friend in high school named Brian, and when I first saw him, this is in an inner city high school, so it was like right before I dropped out. And I thought, because this guy, he was like Zach, he was huge, he was tall, just this tall, like Viking looking dude. And I thought, man, this guy, I bet you nobody messes with this dude, right? And then one day in history class, he came up to me and he sounded like a mouse. I mean, he had the sweetest sounding, like softest voice, and he was just like, "Hey, are you opposed to, help with this project?" I'm just like, "Oh, hey, man, yeah, like, no, come on." So we became friends after that. But um, he had it worse than I did as far as like lacking parental guidance. I mean, his parents, they didn't teach him anything. They didn't teach him how to dress. I mean, I had to teach him like hygiene. You know what I mean? I had to teach him like how to dress at different events, like formal and casual and things like that. He never, how to talk at a job interview. And I mean, this is in high school, but it made me understand. I'm like, wow, there's probably a lot of people that are like Brian. They just didn't have any guidance. They didn't have any help. No one just didn't, sometimes I find myself doing that. Like, I don't even ask if someone wants help. I'll just offer it. If they bristle, fine. But, I find usually people are like, oh, thank you. You know what I mean? Like, thanks for paying attention to me.
A lot of people are just embarrassed to ask for help too,
right.
I think. I know I am.
I've got this.
It's like, I want to be able to do things on my own.
I've got this condition called hyperactive synaptic snapping, and my brain just races. Like, we used to be in the cockpit. Somebody starts telling a joke, and I'm thinking of the next joke, and you were just saying something there, and it made me remember some reunion that I was at. I think it was a 20-year high school reunion. And there was a fella standing there that I in high school, you just didn't want to even go near him because he had a reputation of being a badass. And so we're all standing around, and somebody says, well, so-and-so, Pete, don't you? He says, no, I don't think so. We went to high school together. We had 175 people in our class. And I said, oh, I know you. I said, I mean, you had the reputation where we just wanted to steer clear of you. And he looked shocked, like almost hurt. And another guy says to him, hey, Pete's the guy whose paper we always used to copy off of during the test. And he goes, oh, that guy. And I thought that was like, this was a great compliment for somebody that remembers me. I was a smart kid and everybody copied off my paper. And he was kind of attention. This guy had no idea. I mean, it didn't look like he could do much damage. Age does that to all of us. He had put on some weight. But back then, it was like you just didn't want to go near this guy because he just had this reputation of being this badass. But he wasn't. But that was, it was just, rumors and things like that.
Yeah. I believe everybody, or at least almost everybody, let's say, most people like attention, especially genuine attention. I think, where it's helped me the most is talking to women. It's like once something in my brain clicked when I was a younger man and just said, you know what? I bet you a pretty girl just wants attention. I bet you just got to give the right attention to a woman or that you're interested in, and you'll get rewarded for it. And that has happened. I've surprised myself sometimes with not just women, but people in general, just by giving them genuine attention. Mm-hmm. And it's remarkable sometimes what can happen from that. I actually had one small question more about sure. Flying. Something I thought about earlier while we were talking. So, when, so I make this comparison or this example when I actually do like cars to some degree as far as like as an interest or a hobby. I like older cars because when you drive an older car, that older engine technology and just the heavier materials, you just really feel like you're in that car. You feel the road, right? And that's not necessarily even just driving manual, but just driving older cars. And newer cars are everything is so good. The suspension is so good. They're so comfortable. It's like you don't even feel the car you're driving in. And I was wondering, do pilots feel that with planes? Now, I mean, maybe obviously with smaller and big planes, but can you talk about that a little bit? Like, do you feel like the spatial connection of the vehicle you're in?
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Moving, I would say the first time I transitioned from a P3 to a T34, the trainer, it was smaller. you're strapping into a parachute, you feel more confined, and you're a fish out of water because it's a new airplane. But you're always strapping the airplane to you instead of you strapping into the airplane. So you had to make the airplane your bitch, right? So yeah. I'm going to go off on tangents now. I shouldn't be doing that. But once again, as we progressed, I went to the Super 80, the MD-80, and that was a very small cockpit. And the guys would complain about how tight it was in there. Then I went to the 757, which was a narrow body, but still a bigger cockpit, 767 wide body, gigantic cockpit. We used to ride in the jump seat of the DC-10, gigantic. It's just these big, giant airplanes. And when you're inside, you're just thinking, okay, all these planes fly the same, from a Cessna up to a 747, all right? You got to have some airspeed. If you get too slow, you're going to stall, But you look outside and you watch like a 747 landing, and look at where the cockpit is and where the guy is and all that. And it's just like, how did I know where the landing gear is? Well, you got the radio altimeter that tells you how high you are. You've got the, your peripheral vision and all that stuff. So there's a lot of cues, but it just I don't know. It's probably even more critical in a fighter because of all the G forces they're pulling and what a high stress environment that is. Especially
yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at, is like the physics at play, like the physics at play when you're driving, right? It's much smaller, obviously, than a plane or any larger vehicle. So I'm just curious of like, I feel like I would lose touch because of the amount of physics, like the speed and the weight of it, what's going on around me, that I wouldn't have a complete spatial comprehension of it. I was just curious, like, if you go through that, like, do you feel that, like, when you get off a long flight, let's say you went from New York to LA or whatever, and then you get in a car, you know what I mean? Like, do you feel like you're in a bean or something? Like, how does
you know what? I carry the same stuff over into driving. And like I said, when I was a kid on the bike, I was flying. When I got into the car, I was flying. I was a nerd. I just thought I was always flying. But we used to do something. If you left the cockpit and you came back, the fellow who remained up there would say, report no changes, or he'd say, okay, we've been given a crossing altitude, or they got us on a vector. So it was briefing the other guy, right? So I always make it a joke that, like, if Trudy's driving and she stops at a store and I sit in the car and she gets back in the car, I automatically say no changes. When you're in the airplane and you turn into the right, the first officer will say clear right. So I automatically do that. I say clear right. If I'm with an airline buddy, clear right. It's just these things that you carry over from what you've learned in aviation because they're so standardized, and just trying to prevent things from happening. So it's your mirror adjustment, your seat adjustment. You do the same thing in the airplane. You adjust your seat. You're constantly changing it. Some guys have different positions for takeoff, cruise, and landing, and all that. But just that, situational awareness is what they call it. So
yeah, that's the term I was looking for.
Like when you're in the car, if you turn the radio off, you start hearing all these different noises. They say, "What's that noise?" It might be something a little loose here or something underneath. And in those old cars, I'm amazed when you go to the car shows. The hoods are open. First thing I say, I see the engine. I say, "Look at all the open space under the hood here." It's a V8, but look at all the open space. Now they've crammed all this other stuff in there. It's amazing, how much technology they've thrown into cars. So you got to.
No, yeah.
I got a call.
Yeah,
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I was going off the rails.
I was just gonna say, do you have like a favorite vocab word for like that you guys would have and like for piloting?
We used to say chocks out. Like if we're in the bar, if we wanted to go somewhere, we just go chocks out. Like let's leave, let's go. That was
okay. Chocks.
Chocks. CHOCKS. Those are the wood blocks they put underneath the wheels to prevent the plane from rolling if you release the brakes. So when you give the signal to chocks out, it means you're getting ready to depart. So that was something I would do with Trudy. I would say, go like, at a party, signal chocks out, you ready to go. So trying to think what else. We're cruising. I'm sure I'll come up with it in a couple. After I get done with the podcast, all the fun things to say. But
that's actually I want to piggyback on that, Zach, because when I was a surveyor, we'd be on radios a lot, And so, like, it was me and my cousin a lot of time for like many of those years working together. So if and I'm like perpetually single. So like if I would saw like, a really fine looking woman, right? I didn't want to like, hey man, like, check out the tits and the ass on that one or whatever. So instead we had all these codes for like to describe our environment because everything was coded. So I came up with my own code list of like, so it was like a language. I'll be like, so hey Kenny, I'm like, it's like a 6'9" TNA over there. If you want to just take a look at that, So did you guys do that kind of shit?
They had in the military, they had what they called Falcon codes, and somebody would just come up and say, Falcon code or a Foxtrot Charlie 16. And so if you were privy to having this list that somebody made, you look up, you see 16, and it was like, if you say, I don't know one more time, I'm going to put my flight boot up your ass, or there's all these different things. If brains were dynamite, you couldn't blow your nose. And, they had codes like that, but then, every once in a while in aviation, like with ATC, you'll hear some funny transmissions. For example, there was one time as a female controller, and she told the flight to descend to flight level 240. So you're up around 33,000. They tell you to descend to 240. But sometimes they leave it to your discretion because, you got a nice ride. You want to stay up higher, save fuel and all that. So the guy said, is that pilot's discretion? And the woman said, if it had been pilot's discretion, I would have said pilot's discretion. And it was quiet for a second. And somebody else comes up on the radio and says, didn't I used to be married to you?
Over.
But I was, once again, I can't remember I told you guys these stories in the car, but switching from Denver Center to LA Center, I checked in, and a corporate jet said, Liam, we're getting a really bad ride here. We'd like to try a higher altitude. And LA said, well, how high do you want? What do you want? He says, we want to be as high as we can get for as long as we can get. And I said, I keep the mic. I said, I hear you, brother. So every once in a while you can get a zinger in there. And, but the vocab, there's a lot of lingo, lingo with the Navy stuff. People show up, okay, you can stow your gear later. You just take it through the hatch. There's the head. I've gotten away from that as I've gotten away from the Navy and all that. But ETA is probably the one I use the most, Zach, with the kids. What's your ETA? What's your ETA? Our ETA is this and all that. But, I don't know. This,
Oh, that's good. That's good. Is there any like pilot superstitions and like ones that are like any ones that you believe in or even that you just find are very prevalent?
I think, the first early one as flight students, it was your lucky T-shirt that you wore under your flight suit. So if you had a good flight, and you'd wear that T-shirt again, and then if you had a bad flight with that T-shirt, you get a new one. Or if you wore a different T-shirt and had a bad flight, you go back to the other T-shirt. That was one of the early superstitions. And then I never really liked it when squadrons would brag about, we've obtained 10,000 accident-free hours of flying or things like that, or so many years of accident-free flying. That's kind of like a jinx, like you never want to, say anything bad. But there were two guys flying, and air traffic control called up and said, how's your ride there at 31,000? And the co-pilot said, nice and smooth. So the captain pokes him in the arm, and the FO says, why'd you do that? He says, well, because you're going to jinx it. You never say it's smooth because then it's going to start getting bumpy. So you just say, it's okay with the occasional bump here and there. So the FO's sitting over there. He's kind of fuming because, the captain hit him in his arm. He didn't like that. And he smiles, he folds his arms, says to the captain, he says, hey, look how good those engines are running right now.
This might be the best flight I've ever been on.
That's something I do like, out of spite. It's like, yo, you want to talk about jinx? You want to hit me in the arm? Cool, I'll jinx everything I can.
Yes, yeah. Try not to jinx things like, oh, I guess our flights are going to go, well today or something like that. It's like, don't jinx it yet.
Yeah. So, nice weather.
I always felt that kind of shit was so
clear.
arbitrary too, right? I mean, you might as well just say, well, I've been alive so many years and I haven't died yet. It's like the same statistics.
Well, why do you get life insurance? Because you think you're going to die, right? And some people don't,
right?
And they don't, but not everybody. Everybody who doesn't get life insurance dies, right? I don't know. It's just Yeah, just little jinx or little things you do. So,
Yeah.
but
All right. So I have one. I have what I would say is maybe the final question
Final
for
Jeopardy.
today's show. But do you have any other questions, Zach?
No, I'm all right.
What about you, Pete? Any other questions?
No, but you guys know anytime you want to call and ask me something, I'm more than happy to talk to you guys. This has been a blast.
I'll call you late at night, just.
But no, this has been fun. Thank you for letting me ask the questions too, because this has been a lot of fun. So.
Oh yeah, I love it. I love it when people ask us questions. That's just as fun, really.
Yeah, for real.
It's nice to be interviewed in a way. Okay, so it's pretty simple. Tomorrow morning, if you woke up and you were invited to a podium to speak to the world, what would you say?
Let's see. I think I would say that we need to start talking and listening to each other, because the solutions are out there, but we're being manipulated by the powers that be for their own benefit. And we need to get smart about this and start demanding that each side start talking to each other and solving these problems, because the solutions are out there, but they're greedy. They don't want to give up a little piece of the pie, and that's the problem. So we need to start talking and listening to each other and start demanding that of our leaders.